Okay, so I went ahead and turned the camera back around. The first snippet of what you saw, this is probably going to be in two separate sections because somehow I couldn't get the camera turned back around. But I gave a little pictorial showing of the devotees who were part of the pioneering there of Krishna consciousness in West Africa. Of course, that picture is about 1981 or so. So, or maybe, yeah, maybe 81. And this is obviously after a couple of years of our preaching in Nigeria in particular. I had left off in the former story that I told of my arrival in Nigeria. This is in 1979. And my having now met Brahmananda Maharaj at that time there, and Bhakta Martin, whom I told you we've become lifelong friends. His name is now Pujapachila Bhaktivedanta Shanta Maharaj. But we met on that day. And where I left the story off last time is that Bhakta Martin had promised to come back and cook dinner for me. I had gotten a sort of introduction to what life was going to be like and preaching was going to be like from Brahmananda Maharaj at that time. And we just kind of, decided to go ahead in and take rest. I told you he showed me around and he showed me, what facilities we have, which really wasn't much. I did mention another prominent thing was that we had a program called Books for Africa. So we only had a 2-bedroom flat and the rooms were relatively small. There was a small kitchen area, 1 bathroom, and the living room area was from floor to ceiling, literally floor to ceiling, with books that had been donated. So we had whole sets of Srimad Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, and other small books and Back to God magazines. So we had a whole, lot of books to be distributed. So I was super excited for 2 reasons. One, it gave me a chance to do the service of book distribution, but more than that, I had planned certainly to take time to go through systematically reading all of Srila Prabhupada's books and purports. That was like a vow that I made that I wanted to accomplish when I arrived. Unlike when we were preaching in America, there was always some kind of service to be done or something like that. So one of the conditions that I made for myself in going to Africa to preach was that I was going to find a way and time to go through all of Srila Prabhupada's books. And it just so happens, very fortunately, all the books were there. So I just took that as a further sign of approval from our Guru Varga that this is what I was supposed to do. So I was really tired after the flight and the experiences I had in the apartment with the, turns out he was a Punjabi gentleman who lived downstairs. And then finally Brahmananda and Bhakta Martin's arrival. I was really tired, so I went and took rest in the room that was allotted to me. And it was hard to sleep because you got many things going on. One is the flight, there's jet lag going on, and you don't really have a sensibility because I hadn't been sleeping for probably the last couple of days due to excitement, preparation, other things. And now I was here and I had so many things running through my mind. How will I preach? What will I do? Where will I go? Who's going to go with me? What's going to be the story? So with all that running through the mind, I laid down, but I couldn't really go to sleep. I think I gradually dozed off. That must have been around 4 o'clock or something. And then around maybe 6 o'clock or something like that, I think I woke up. So I didn't sleep very long. And from my room, I could go out onto a little, I guess it was a little bit of a balcony area or something like that. I don't know what you would call it. It wasn't very big, but I could go out on that. And I looked over and I saw Bhakta Martin actually coming. So I got excited. Okay, I'll get to talk to Bhakta Martin. I'll get to know him a little better. And he was carrying like what looked like a tree trunk or something wrapped up in newspaper and a couple of other bags of some goods and so forth that I guess he was coming to prepare dinner with. So I want to set this up because it's one of the funniest stories that happened to me. But at the same time, it was pretty amazing. So I was staying, obviously, like I said, prior to coming to Africa, I was staying at Govinda's restaurant, which was our preaching center in Washington, D.C., which was run by His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Swami. And there, of course, in the morning, we would, eat pretty simply. We would have oatmeal, fruit, and almost like the olden days temple program. But throughout the rest of the day for lunch and dinner, we pretty much ate at Govinda's restaurant. So, I mean, as I mentioned before, they had some of the absolutely best cooks ever. So, pakoras, two kinds of sabji, saffron rice, halava, and a tamarind drink that was, to die for. And so this was kind of the norm every day, at least for lunch and dinner, of our eating. One thing of note, though, Srila Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, though he, obviously had access also to eat the same way, his meal, believe it or not, at that time was mostly dried fruits, nuts, and he liked popcorn. So that was a big thing for him. Every now and then he would take a pakora. Later on, that also kind of phased out, and he was eating kind of completely raw, and mostly dry fruits, nuts, fresh fruits could be there. Some popcorn was like a treat, and that was it. And this went on for years and years. And, so living in that environment, but eating like that, that was his kind of standard, So I knew right from that time, the kind of Vaishnav standard he had in terms of sadhana. Of course he would, obviously be up with everybody else early in the morning, chanting rounds, everything else. But especially given the fact that we were staying in a restaurant, which was probably one of the premier restaurants in ISKCON, though it may not be known, but had some of the best cooks, and like I mentioned, was very successful overall. But with that level of cooking, he ate extremely simply, but that didn't go for all of us. So we took advantage to have wonderful lunches and dinners every single day. So I said that because now Bhakta Martin was going to introduce me to my first meal in Nigeria. And so I was, partly excited, and I figured, Brahmananda Prabhu also had some vegetables and other things in our kitchen and refrigerator. So I thought the combination of different things that would be put together would be, okay, this would just be interesting. So two things were very notable for me. One was the what looked like a tree trunk. Actually, what it was yam. And yam is like, I don't know, for lack of a better word, a potato-like dish. Or cassava is pretty comparable to it. But anyway, so Bhakta Martin went ahead and shaved off the external part of it, and then he cut it and diced it, and then started doing the cooking preparation. And for a oil, he was using palm oil. Now, I had seen palm oil back in New York, but it was only in the context of a study I was doing of African religious traditions and the use of palm oil in the ritual and everything, but I had never actually tasted or eaten palm oil. So he had the palm oil, or red oil, and he put some of the red oil in, and, then he began, doing whatever other spicing he was doing. But anyway, he started to stir it, and he told me we were going to have this yam porridge, and it was really good. And he started to stir, and as he was stirring, we started to get to know each other. I was telling him about my background, he was telling me about his background, which was really interesting. He actually, I think, had studied journalism, if I remember correctly. He was very intelligent, super intelligent devotee, as we know now, and, from very good family in Ghana, but was living in Nigeria to make a living, because at that time, the wealth of Nigeria was attractive for even people from other African countries to come and live. So he was staying there and working, and he was telling me about his background, his family, and the region they were from. They weren't from in Ghana, Accra is like the main city, but they were from the Volta region. So he was explaining everything, and I simultaneously was explaining, my background, where I was from. So anyway, he began to stir, and as he was stirring the porridge, it thickened. So it got like thicker and thicker and thicker. Now, the ladle he was using to stir was obviously, if devotees who've been to festivals and seen the large pots, and they've seen very big ladles for stirring, the wooden kind of almost look like boat oars, miniature versions of them. That's what he was using to stir this pot of yam porridge. So the porridge got thicker and thicker and thicker, and he kept stirring and stirring, and we're talking and talking. And in my mind, I'm thinking, wow, this is really not going to be, double subjis, pakor, and halava type dinner. But as he began to stir, suddenly in the midst of one sentence, pow! The ladle that he was stirring with broke. So at that time in my mind, I thought, oh my gosh, whatever this is we're about to eat, it is probably going to have no resemblance to what I've been eating and I've become accustomed to over the last, 8 months, a year, whatever it was, I was at the restaurant in DC. So in my mind, I was thinking, okay, this is another place you're going to have to surrender and get used to the fact that things are going to be different, right? Because I had no idea when I was coming what it was going to be like eating wise and other kinds of stuff. So, but anyway, after he made everything, the porridge, and then he made some vegetable and then some other things. Actually, overall, it was really good. So, we talked for the rest of that night. Then he had to leave to go back in, because he worked in the morning. So I had also, said, okay, that's it. I'm gonna have to surrender. This is what eating is gonna be like here. So the next, I went ahead and went to bed. And of course, I had no problem sleeping because after eating yam porridge and so forth, I guess the nature of the meal itself was enough to, with the combination of jet lag and everything else, to go ahead and put me to sleep. So I went ahead and went to sleep pretty much. And maybe I was so tired that I didn't really get into the fact that, there was a generator that we had, and the lights, there was like rolling blackouts a lot. And the generator would kick on, but it, just somehow or another, it seemed like white noise in the background. And I didn't really pay much attention to it, at least that night. Nor did I pay attention to the fact that I was probably getting bit by mosquitoes quite a bit. Because when I woke up in the morning, I did have a number of bumps. So I concluded, it's all good. So I got up in the morning, of course, as we had been used to in the restaurant. I got up for Mangal Arti. Brahmananda Maharaj also was up and everything. And we did our Mangal Arti. And actually, Bhakti Martin would come for the Mangal Arti before going to work. So Bhakti Martin showed up for the Mangal Arti. Brahmananda did the worship, and I did kirtan, which I was very much loving doing kirtan. So for me, that was also very nice, because every morning I would do the kirtan. Brahmananda would do the worship. So he did that, and then we would have a class, and Brahmananda Maharaj would generally give the class, but he would ask us each to speak sometimes something from Srimad Bhagavatam, where he would ask questions, so forth, so on. So Bhakti Martin went on to work, as he normally would, but promised to come back later on, and maybe we would go out and try to sell some books. So after everything was said and done with the morning program and the class and etc., Brahmananda was going to make breakfast. So I thought, all right, dinner was a super interesting arrangement. Let's see what happens with breakfast. So Brahmananda made some oatmeal, and I thought, okay, yeah, this is standard temple fare. So we're gonna have. But then he said, listen, I'm gonna teach you how to cook a Bengali preparation. So I was thinking, I don't, what are we gonna do Bengali for breakfast? Even though there are a lot of things, but what are we gonna do particularly? So he had an eggplant, and what he did was he sliced the eggplant, into slices, and then he poured some oil into a frying pan. He took all of the spices, some cumin, haldi, turmeric, curry powder, just a whole, bunch of things, and threw them in the oil. So the oil's getting hot, and the spices which are in the oil, they're starting to, I guess, marinate in the oil or whatever, and the aroma of all that's coming up. He took the eggplant and kind of dropped it in, just like to fry it. And I had seen that, before, from Bengali people cooking in the West. I hadn't been to India at this point, remember. But I kind of seen, so I, had the idea, yes, this is a Bengali eggplant dish, so forth, so on. When I would get to India later on, I would see how they actually rolled mustard seeds and actually made mustard and dipped it in that, so it's a whole different thing. But yeah, this looked pretty bona fide. But then he had some white bread, and this white bread, we didn't make the bread. There was a lot of concessions made at that time. I mean, a lot of things we would go out and buy at stores and stuff like that. So he had bread, which, had nothing, illicit for us in it. There were no eggs or anything like that. But he had this really kind of pretty firm white bread, and you just sliced it down. And he would take that white bread, put it on top of the eggplant, and it would kind of merge together. He would flip it over, and we had oatmeal and this Bengali bread and eggplant sabji thing for breakfast. So, I was thinking, wow, I'm just not going to get into thinking about eating here so much, and that was fine for me because I was thinking I would like to practice more austerities around eating and everything else. Like I mentioned, His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Swami always ate very simply. So I thought, okay, this is my time to, kind of be similar, eat more fruits and things like that, and kind of not worry about eating so much, because this definitely wasn't going to match up to the standard of, living at a Govinda's restaurant. So after that, I was very anxious at that time to get out and start doing something. So Brahmananda at that time told me, yeah, look, here's a couple of naira. Don't go far, but you can go out in the neighborhood if you want to, just to take a few books and go out and go around the neighborhood, and begin doing some kind of distribution. I thought, yeah, I'll get a chance to see the neighborhood in the daytime, get a little familiar. Where we were staying did not seem very dangerous in Surulere. It was pretty, I don't say remote, but it wasn't really remote, but anyway, it didn't seem dangerous. That was the point. So I, took some books. I went around to a few people, and I remember stopping at a stand that sold, cold drinks and things like that, and I was selling some books. I was, listen, I got some small books here, and my pitch was always that, hey, these are the books of life. These books tell you how to make your life better, whatever status of life you're in, whatever you want to accomplish in life. If you read these books, even if you just possess one of these books in your home, it will give you the power to fulfill your, life goals. So it wasn't like a really, thick preaching presentation. It was just straight on like that. And, generally people bought a book. I was yet to find out just how much, book distribution was a big thing in Africa. I had no idea. This was just a small thing. So one of the people, in exchange for the book, he gave me I think 1 or 2 naira or something like that, but he also gave me a bottle of bitter lemon. Now, before that time, I had seen bitter lemon back in America, but, in my younger days, my parents, they always had bitter lemon, and it was something that I associated with alcohol and all of that. It's not alcoholic, but it's associated for mixed drinks and things. So I wasn't, I was like, no. And he was saying, no, you should drink this. It's good for you. It's cold, So, in broken English, he was telling me this. So, and I said, no, I don't drink, no alcohol. No. He said, no alcohol. So, I looked at it, nothing. So I drank it. And if anybody's been to India and you've had your first experience with limca, which is like a lemony lime soft drink thing. So that's what bitter lemon was like. And I, took it, and from that time on, bitter lemon became like a staple in my diet, right? Day, noon, and night. And actually quite fortunately, it was also something that was very good as a prophylaxis, I think I'm saying that right, against malaria, right? I'll get to a malaria story down the line here somewhere. I don't know if we'll get to it today. But it's supposed to be a very good preventative for malaria. So I didn't even know it at the time, but I was drinking them pretty regularly. So I'm not sure the sugar, if there was sugar in it, I'm not sure how good that is for anything, right? I don't do any kind of sugar and stuff now so much, but anyway, overall, I was drinking them. And Brahmananda, he liked them also. I would bring him back some bitter lemons and so forth as well. So the first day experience of going on preaching everything seemed really, really nice. Dr. Martin came back a little later, I think, that day, so we didn't get a chance to go out together. But perhaps that was close to a weekend, because I do remember the next time going out, I would be going out with Dr. Martin. Now, an interesting thing also is that we had a Daihatsu van. I don't know who had donated that van, but it had been there from, way before I got there. And it was very small and compact, but it was a stick shift. And when I was in the Air Force, I used to drive a stick shift and what have you, but mostly every car I had after that was automatic, so I was not used to it. And in particular, this Daihatsu van, the shifting of the gears was a little different and what have you. So I was having difficulty. Okay, I'm not going to be able to drive this thing, you know, quite yet. So I think Brahmananda took us out the first couple of days and dropped us off downtown in Lagos and would come back and pick us up. So myself and Bhakta Martin, we went downtown. I think this is my first genuine Sankirtan trip, right? We going downtown together. We had boxes of books. Brahmananda unloaded us. And I remember the place. It was by the post office. And there's a little like island, and you have the post office across the street and all that. And then there was a church. I remember that also on another corner, which we could see. So he unloaded us with books, and the books that we took out was The Science of Self-Realization primarily, Life Comes from Life, Perfection of Yoga, I believe, and I think that was the bulk of the books we took out. So anyway, we opened up the cases of books, and we started a kirtan, just myself and Bhakta Martin. So we started a kirtan. Now, because Brahmananda and Bhakta Martin had been going downtown, people were used to hearing the kirtan, and I'm having this as a first experience, but Martin knew, Bhakta Martin, that people gather. So then people started to gather around the kirtan, and when we finished the kirtan, Bhakta Martin said, go ahead and speak something, because that's what Brahmananda did. He'd always speak a little bit after the kirtan. So I started speaking, and it was straight preaching that, you know, this world is temporary, that we're all spirit souls, and though we want to live eternally, we are in a situation where we find ourselves not able to exist eternally here. But there is another life beyond this, and, you know, the activities that you do in one life carry to another life. This is called karma. And so people were listening very, very attentively, actually. And after speaking, because it was the habit to do that in America, I would always ask, is there any questions, right? And sure enough, a few people, you know, raised their hands and they began to ask questions, you know, well, how do you know there's a life after life, and this and that? And so we'd have discussions, and the discussions, now Bhakta Martin would be preaching to some people, I'd be preaching to some people, and those discussions were great energy, because more people would gather around each of the groups that were discussing, and discussions would become pretty lively. And then at a certain point, I would always give but if you really want to know the answers, you can find them in these books. And so what people would do was to get in a queue. People would go ahead and get in a line, and people would come up and they'd pay whatever the naira was, you know, purchase a book. Bhakta Martin was selling books, I was selling books. And so it would go on orderly until we got down to the last couple of books. When we would get down to the last couple of books, people would start pushing and shoving, and, you know, oh, I need it today. I have to get the book today. No, you get in the line. And so inevitably, we would just, like, sometimes even leave the last couple of books in the box, and people would just go for it. So I was shocked, because now I saw, wow, this is like, unlike in America, there was no need to change clothes. This was Dhoti, Kirta, Tilak, Sikha, you know, straight preaching. There was no kind of lines that had to be said or anything. This was just straight preaching, straight introduction of the books, and the power of that presentation was enough with sincere people and interested people to distribute boxes and boxes of books. So I was like super enlivened, because I said if I didn't do anything else for the rest of the time I'm in Africa, just being able to come down and do this, I would be ecstatic. So Brahmananda, he came a little bit later on and picked us up. I think we had sold out of books by that time, but we were still having conversations with people. I don't know if it happened on that day, but I'll tell it anyway, because it is a recurring theme that would happen not only in Nigeria, but sometimes in Ghana. When I got to Zambia, in Zimbabwe, wherever I went preaching in Africa, this would be one of the things that happened. And it's a little comical, but also it tells the story of how deeply rooted the Christian missionaries had been in Africa, how deeply rooted the missionary activities had been there. So inevitably, we would be preaching or discussing, and a crowd would form, and the questions would start, as I mentioned before. And then somebody would raise their hand and say, yes, I have a question, right? And also, most people, and this was a thing, people do speak like, it's not really pidgin English, it's not like the Caribbean, but it's a form of English that's kind of, I don't know what to call it. I'm going to have to wait for Shantamaraj to come on. But it's a unique way of speaking English for the most part. But so many people are educated that also a lot of people just spoke straight, plain, but it was British type English and very well. So a lot of times people, would come up and they would raise their hand. Excuse me, I do have a question. I just want to know, what do you think about Jesus? Right? And their voice would change. It would suddenly become like Baptist revival energy. I was shocked because, they would start off speaking like in the sort of local inflection, right? Because in Nigeria they speak Yoruba, some people speak Igbo, other languages, and they would speak with those inflections. Then you would get the British English inflection, and then suddenly when they started talking about Jesus and the gospel, they would change to like Southern Baptist revival. Yes, I do have a question. What about Jesus? Right? And so then you get into these whole discussions about the Bible, relation with the Bible and Krishna, and oh my gosh. So sometimes those would become very heated and would go on, because for some people they thought it was like a imposition of something not good being brought into the country. They felt in some cases they were being delivered from the traditional, religions, and now here comes some other foreign kind of traditional religion, and we're trying to save the country of Christianity. So sometime that arose. Now, some of those discussions, because people were very intelligent, as I said, people did not just give arguments for argument's sake. People would, if you had valid points, they would say, I'll come back tomorrow, my brother, we'll speak again. And they would come back the next day with a series of Bible quotes, and you'd have to get out your references from the Bible and from, Vedic Sastra and be able to make the, parallels and give sufficient arguments. Another thing that we found out, we weren't having a Sunday program at that time. And maybe I'm getting ahead of myself by speaking about it, but I just wanted to bring this up. Later on, when we would have Sunday programs, what I noticed was that when we would distribute books to people, people read the books. So I remember by the time we were regularly giving Sunday program, Brahmananda, because we had more devotees there, then Brahmananda would ask me, in many cases, or one of the other leading devotees there, to give class. And I gave class pretty regularly in Africa, especially at the Sunday program. And whenever we would go to questions and answers, the questions would be, yes, I have a question. Yes, on page 96 of Life Comes from Life, and they would quote verbatim that section or paragraph and then ask you the question. So if you had not been reading or you weren't studying yourself, it would have been very embarrassing, because people's questions were very direct, very specific, and very sincere. Now, because, like I said, I had dedicated myself to studying Srila Prabhupada's books very deeply and everything then, if you did give sufficient answers and you did give convincing, arguments, then people genuinely would respond to that. Like I remember once, and I'm kind of way ahead of myself now and I'll fill in the gap, but once we did have a temple and everything, if you convinced somebody, they would take a taxi home, pack their bags, and come back, because they had read in the book that the only way you can really do bhakti is if you surrender. So this is how preaching was going in Africa. So let me try to back up and fill in some of the gaps here, because that was a little bit ahead. This is by the time we had a temple. So for quite a few months we went on preaching out of the little flat, and we did not have any Sunday program or anything like that. All of our programs were kind of outreach programs. During the day while Dr. Martin went to work, I would go out in the neighborhood and distribute books. And once I got the driving down, I would practice the driving actually by driving up and down the road from our flat to Dr. Martin's apartment. And I would do that every day until I got the gear shifting in that Daihatsu down. And once I was able to be comfortable with that, I would then drive us down on Sankirtan and drive us back. I would adventure out to new Sankirtan spots and all of these kind of things. But once I also did that, I would drive out sometimes someplace and I'd park and I'd just do a different neighborhood by myself. So another interesting story was that one day when I went out with some books by myself during the day, I came across, it was a pretty nice neighborhood, everything. I came across, a few houses and distributed some books. Some people weren't home. Other people said, no, not interested. The usual things that you would get trying to distribute books. So I went to one house, I knocked on the door, and one lady came and answered the door. Now the lady, she looked so familiar to me. And I was thinking, no, that can't be. She had on African dress and everything, but she looked really familiar. And when she spoke, also, she didn't have a Nigerian accent or anything. In fact, she sounded pretty American. But, there are a lot of people there who, the English is really, really, like I said, either British English or they've studied in the States or whatever. So I wasn't sure, but I knew I recognized the face from somewhere. But anyway, she opened the door and kind of went and spoke to another gentleman who was sitting there who came to the door, and he was dressed pretty regally in, a whole kind of Islamic sort of garb. And I said, well, hey, we're selling books, and these books talk about life, and they talk about the nature of, the afterlife. And he said, afterlife? What is this afterlife? And so I was thinking, now, is he asking genuinely, or what is this? So he said, why don't you come in? So then I thought, I had not generally been going inside of houses, right? But I thought, I had a, a vibe that this was not something dangerous, and, he looked very spiritual, actually, quite frankly. So I agreed, I went in, and when I went in the house, it was pretty amazing because it was very set up in a sort of Islamic decor, but you could tell it was a whole different vibe. So the lady who originally answered the door, I saw her again, then I saw another lady come out. And then I remembered where I saw that lady at. That lady and the other lady who came out, both were singers in New York that I remember from a very popular group called Chic. There was a very popular band back in that day called Chic, and those girls used to sing in that band. So then I immediately blurted that out. Oh, I remember you from New York. And said, oh, yeah, I remember that. Yeah, did you, because sometimes I would see them at rehearsals, and I'd be playing with somebody, and I'd see them in different settings. Oh, I remember you, yeah, so forth. So then the gentleman, he began to say, yeah, these are my wives, plural. And we sat down and we started talking. It turns out this gentleman, he was a practitioner of Sufism. And so he was very steeped in the mystic traditions of Islam and Sufism. And we had I think we talked for maybe 3-4 hours because I know I had to consider it was getting dark. And in driving back, I had to be really careful because something maybe I'll explain just coming up right after this was a feature that was, something not as palatable about preaching in Nigeria. And I'll tell you in a minute. But anyway, it was getting darker, but we had spoken for 3 or 4 hours about so many esoteric aspects of Islam and about Krishna consciousness. I told him about the Chand Kazi story. So, it was just very, very amazing, and I was very enlivened. He wanted a whole set of books. So I told him I would have to obviously come back. I only had Self-Realization and a few other books that I, kept in the trunk of the Daihatsu, and I gave him what I had there. But I told him I'd bring him a whole set of Sriman Bhagavatam and whatever else we had. So in leaving and going back, it had gotten dark. And I had to drive very, very carefully, but I was able to get back. And when I got back, Brahmananda, he mentioned, oh, wow, you came back a little late. Because we would also do a kind of evening kirtan and everything. At least in the beginning, we were doing that. And then when we got the actual temple, we were doing it. But there was a time when we were just going out and doing so much preaching at night with life membership and the Krishna Club and all of that, that we would come back very late. But I came back and Dr. Martin was there. I told him about the experience. We kind of had dinner and everything. And I told Brahmananda, I sold, a couple of sets of books. He was really enlivened. But the thing I was going to mention about driving in Nigeria, which, I experienced after some time, was Now, this is 1979. I know things are vastly different now. But, you know, there was one or two roads. No, I don't think one or two roads, but I know there was a main road. It's called Ikorodo Road. And just cars are always zooming up and down. And at the same time, pedestrians are always trying to run across that street. And obviously those two things don't mix. So you inevitably get like very nasty traffic accidents. The issue is that when there is a traffic accident, because sometimes if the driver was going too fast or didn't stop on time, whatever, rather than allowing things to be adjudicated by bringing the police and, you know, the whole accident investigation, a mob would form and they would just beat you, you know, sometimes to death, right? So a lot of times drivers, if they did have a traffic accident involving a pedestrian, they would just take off and they would go report it at the police station, but they wouldn't stop. And in many cases, a lot of people would not move or touch the body until a relative was notified. In the cases where the relatives lived outside of the city, that could be 2-3 days. So unfortunately, you would find sometimes that there would be bodies which had been hit by a car on Friday, and you know, you're driving Monday and the same, you know, corpse is still there. So I was always very, very careful if I had to drive at night anytime, or when we were out driving at night, to just be really careful about, you know, where I was going and getting back and slowing down and watching things. You know, grace of God, I never had an accident in Nigeria. Later on, I will tell you about one I had in Zambia, but I never had an accident in Nigeria, even though I went out at night, you know, many times for preaching and other things. So, another form of preaching that I mentioned was the Life Membership and the Friends of Krishna preaching. So these were two programs which had, you know, been going on for some years. The Life Membership program was actually run out of England, and a devotee who also had preached both, I think he had come through Nigeria, but definitely in Central Africa and in East Africa a lot, a devotee who lived here in Alachua named Jalakar Prabhu. Him and his good wife used to run the Life Membership program out of Bhaktivedanta Manor. And this program allowed members to do two things. One is they got a subscription to Back to Godhead magazine. Two, they were given a gift pack which included japa beads, incense, pictures of, you know, our deities, and a set of books. And they got also a passport. It was called the ISKCON passport. And essentially that ISKCON passport allowed them to travel anywhere in the world to any temple and get 3 days to stay in a guest room in the temple. So that was a huge selling point for many of the expat Indian community, expatriate Indian community, who may have been working in any of these African countries. That was a huge thing for them, right? That they could go somewhere and you pretty much had a 3-day stay in any temple for free. You know, of course, you know, a lot of times they would give a donation, obviously, but generally under the program, it was free. And then Friends of Krishna was a more of a local program where people would join and they had access to get a set of japa beads, get books, and they had the ability to come to the temple and they would get discounts in the gift shop or something like that. So it was more of a local program. But the way that we did these programs was what was amazing. Brahmananda, he would suit up to go out for evening preaching. That was his thing. We would come back from the book distribution, take a shower, take some, you know, dinner. If we had time, we would do the, you know, Sundarati and, you know, maybe read a little bit. But other than that, we would saddle right up and we'd get back in the van and we would drive out to a destination, either a Indian family house or, and I have to check with Puja Pashila Shanta Maharaj to remember her name, but there was a lady, a Nigerian lady, who was a assistant pastor at a church. And she was arranging a lot of programs in the church and in other local venues. And she would always come by the temple to pick us up. We wouldn't take our car, then we would ride with her. She was apparently very wealthy. And she would come by and she would say, "You ready?" And she would get us all in the car. And she was always dressed to the nines. And she would take us to some church group. And we had a Fairchild projector. Fairchild projectors are really old. And it's like a projector in a suitcase. You open it up, and it's like the sound and the projection. Everything is right there, and all you need is like a sheet or something to show it on. Or you can actually look right on the screen if you have a small enough audience, right on little case, but generally we were projected onto something. So many times we went out and did programs, and the films we would show would always be, what is that? Life Comes from Life. There was actually a film like that, or something to do with the soul, and Vrindavan, the land of Krishna. So those two things we would show quite often. So whenever we would go to make a life member, the tactic that Brahmananda Swami would use would be to come and we would do kirtan. He would speak a little something. Then he would even have one of us speak something. He would introduce Bhakta Martin. He's the first, local devotee. And we're trying to, do preaching and so forth here. And he would say, you should become a member. A lot of times the Indian families, they would invite and they would say, oh, please, you take prasad first. We'll talk about membership, all that. Take prasad and everything. So we would take prasad. And of course, now there was also this stark contrast between our pretty austere eating, I would say, at the flat, and now eating at the house of, there were different varieties. Primarily in Nigeria, there were Sindhi families. And the Sindhi families, their cooking is a certain way, Gujarati cooking a certain way, Bengali cooking a certain way. Of course, as you go around, you begin to notice all these differences. Like in Zambia, Zimbabwe's primarily Gujarati families and expatriates from everywhere, but primarily Gujarati families as businesses, and the prasad was a lot different. So anyways, but all of it was great. So we would have these amazing meals, and like I said, probably I would not at all entertain that now, gulab jamans and all these different things. So it would get rather late, and Brahmananda would show one of the films, Life Comes from Life, or, Krishna, Vrindavan, Land of Krishna. And then he would talk to the person, and, you should really become a member. And the person would say, Swamiji, we will talk about it. You can come and visit me at my shop, or you come and visit me at the factory. Brahmananda would hit the switch again and play the film all the way over again. 1 hour later, he would ask again. So you should support. You should become a member. And they would say, but Swami, and he would get ready to hit the button again and say, oh, Swami, wait, I'll write check. All right. So he pretty much, like, it was, I don't know, transcendental coercion or whatever, but he would not leave until they became members. And I remember he would always walk out and he would, Hare Krishna, thank you so much. It would be 11 o'clock at night, but thank you so much and everything. And they would be just about, ready to fall asleep in front of us. So, and I do remember a few times when Brahmananda would put the film on, and he would fall asleep actually, snoring and all, and then wake up just as the film ended and ask them again to become members. So our preaching schedule was like this, and it went on for quite some time, and it was successful. I mean, we were making members, we were distributing books during the day. Myself, Bhakta Martin, we were going downtown and distributing books. I was driving the little Daihatsu. I remember one day, I don't know what happened, but something went on. I remember driving the Daihatsu back in second gear. Now, another thing that would be of note was that in Nigeria, traffic was so bad that they made people have alternate license plates, even numbers on one day, odd numbers on another. But very wealthy people would always have two cars where they had, both even and odd numbers, so you couldn't avoid the traffic. So I remember there were many times when we would just be in such bad traffic, we would shut the van off and just do kirtan in the van. And, people would gather around and we'd try to sell out any books we had left or just preach until it got really late and traffic was cleared, and then we would drive back. So like this, preaching went on for, quite some time in Nigeria, and I was, extremely happy. I had my daily routine. I was eating so much lighter, like I mentioned, because it was a little austere eating thing. And also it was good for me because my health was getting better and so forth and so on. And I was just really, really feeling inspired and enlivened. I think I'll end today, as not to go too long, with one more pretty amazing Sankirtan story. So I started to venture out farther and farther in terms of the daytime book distribution by myself. So there was a very wealthy section of Lagos called Victoria Island. And on Victoria Island, you had all of the wealthier segments of society, and you also had a residential place where the parliament and the politicians lived. It was like the people who were from other states in Nigeria, their residents, while they were in Lagos, would be at this place, because the capital later moved to Abuja, but at that time everything was going on in Lagos. So I drove one day and I went to a few houses, but it was so difficult because now you weren't like at little houses where you could just open the gate and go to the door and knock. These were these huge mansions. You couldn't get facility to get in as easily. So I was driving around, I was a little flustered, and then I pulled the Daihatsu up to this gate. And I saw that each person who pulled up to the gate had a pass, the gates would open, and it would take some time for the gate to close. So I just waited till one car went in, waited till it got in a little bit, and I drove the Daihatsu right in behind it and found a parking space. So when I found a parking space, I looked up and there were all these apartments. And the apartments were the apartments of the Congress and the Senate or the Parliament. It was the political residence of all of the senators and representatives from the different states. So what I did, and the reason I could tell was because on the back of their cars, they have their emblems. So I parked and I said, wow, how am I going to do this? So I took a piece of paper, a notebook piece of paper, and I took like a handful of the Srimad Bhagavatams. And I went and I knocked on one of the doors, and the person came to the door, and this is going to get really interesting in a minute. Opened the door and said, yes, can I help you? You know, I said, oh yeah, I'm coming from America. We have a very special set of books here. They are strictly meant for the leaders of society. So he said, oh really? I said, yes, these books speak about the entire human condition and how to understand human beings and therefore how to interact and how to do your best in communicating. And so he was really interested. Oh, come on in, come on in. So he asked to see the books and everything else. And it is the custom like it is in India that if you enter someone's home, they have to offer you something. And one of the traditional things that they offer in Nigeria is something called kola nut. So he brought out the kola nut, and you know they have house servants, I should say, or something like that. So they brought out the kola nut, and they cut it open, and they offered. And I said, oh well, you know, I'm pretty strict diet. I don't eat this. I don't eat this. They said, no, this is just a fruit. This is not, this is not. There's no illicit things, meat or anything like that. It's just a fruit. So I thought, this guy's about to buy a set of books, right? Okay. So, and plus the piece of kola nut that you eat is always really small. I mean, you don't eat a piece bigger than that. So I put it in my mouth. I'm chewing it and everything. It's really bitter. And I don't want to swallow it, but all the juice is going down and everything. Anyway, so he buys a set of books. He calls up all the representatives from his state and tells them they should buy a set of these books. He fills out his information on my little notebook pad and everything, and then he gives me the apartments of the other ones. So now I'm like super hyped up. I get up, I leave that 3 books I had with him. I grab another 3, go to the next, and then I'm running out of books now. So the next 3 that I grab, I say, listen, this is just a representation of what we have. You make your order, and then tomorrow I will come and deliver them to you, the whole set, right? So in this way, I was making sets, orders for sets of Srimad Bhagavatam. And I had gotten to about 10 or 12, and it was starting to get dark, everything. But my energy was like, wow, I could do this forever. And I remember to go to each place, you had to go up and down the stairs. And I was like having no problem, like running up and down the stairs, going to the car, going back and forth. And when I got in the car, I still had so much energy, right? I was so excited, and I'm thinking, wow, I'm just really hyped up, and I'm really, really fired up because I just sold all these sets of Srimad Bhagavatam. Brahmananda's going to be ecstatic. This is great. I drive back to the flat. I get down, and I'm almost like jogging. So I know something is not right? So I'm almost like jogging. So I get to the door and I run in. I'm telling Brahman, hey, I saw so many books today. I like 12 sets of books and so forth. I think we can do a whole bunch of these. So many books. And Brahman said, what's wrong with you? He's like, slow down. What's going on with you? What happened? So I said, nothing. It was great. I saw a whole bunch of books and everything. He said, did you eat anything? So I said, no. I wouldn't dare eat out at any, Carmi's house or anything like that. He said, but they always offer something. Did you take anything? I said, yeah. I just took some of the cola fruit thing. So then Brahmananda told me that the kola nuts are a stimulant. So they are like, I don't know what's an equivalent to it, but it's like, like caffeine personified or something, right? So every single apartment I went to, I took a little bite of this thing because, you know, not to offend the guest. So now I'm like hyped up and wired up to no end. And Brahmananda said, just calm down. He made some tea and everything. And so, you know, it was like completely hilarious after all was said and done. And Dr. Martin was explaining to me about the tradition of cola and all this. In the meantime, I've got a headache at this point because I've eaten so many of them. So really, really wonderful thing. And of course, I did go back to that place, not eating cola nuts anymore, right? I would always accept a glass of water and like an orange or something like that. But I was able to sell so many sets of Srimad Bhagavatam because no politician wanted to be outdone by the other. So if somebody had a set of the books, then the guy from the next place wanted a set. And I remember spending like a series of weeks just going back and selling till I was just about sold everyone in that complex. So that was one of the great sort of Sankirtan stories of preaching in Nigeria. I think I'm going to end here so as not to go too long. And then we'll pick up again with some more pretty amazing stories. Some things are pretty funny, and other things, you know, there's obviously, you know, ups and downs, and some things are tragic and all of that as well. But it was such a great experience. I did want to document it, and I'm doing so much of it from memory that I know Pujapa Shanti Maharaj and others will come in and be able to, Ishwara Prabhu, I know, may see this, and he'll be able to add some dynamics about later parts of it. So my Dandavat Pranam devotees, this is part 2, and we will get to part 3 coming up. As much as I have time to get these done, I'll go ahead and get them done. I vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripasindhuvevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. This is the second one. If you did not see the first one and you want to go back and make a reference, then you can go back and look at number 1. I'll say this is volume number 2. I don't know if I mentioned that it was volume 1 and volume 1, so that would be a little confusing, but there's only 2 of them now. So if you look at the other one, that will give you kind of a backdrop, and it was the prequel, so to speak, to this one. And I'll try to go ahead and make sure I announce that this is volume 2, and I will announce what volume it is as we go forward. All right, Dandavat Pranam, Radhe Radhe.